This is the Innocent Dev, and welcome to my channel. And today we're going to be talking about Python argparse simplified. It is an built-in Python module that was introduced in Python 2.7 to simplify collecting arguments from the terminal for the command line interface to use in your program as you would want, right? So let's get into it. So the most normal way people would normally collect arguments from the terminal is using a module named sys, right? I will just import sys just to show you exactly what I'm talking about first. So sys is a module that collects arguments from the terminal. It can be used for multiple more things, but what we are going to be focusing on under sys is sys.argv, which is the one that specifically goes to the terminal. Does that make sense? But now let's make a simple case study first that's going to specify how we are going to deal with the arguments, right? Let's say now we have a program and we want to collect arguments from an external user, and we want to use this program to display a result that's tailored to what that user specified in the terminal, right? But I'll just make a simple function for Python first. Let's say, for example, we want to have a function that's going to return the sum of the numbers specified by the user from the terminal, right? So we would say get, for example, sum, and then we would just return sum. We will just return sum of the argument specified by the user. For example, let's say in this case we would have the user specifying 3 different types of arguments, which would be something like 2, 4, and 7, right? And let's say now the first one would be let's just say first, and we would have second, and then we would have third, right? So now we want to get the sum of first, second, and third. I will just pass it into a list because that's what the sum function is looking for. We'll just say first, second, and third as well, right? So what this function would return is the sum of the numbers that would be passed into it. So just to test if our function is working and nothing is broken, we'll just say get sum, and then we can pass things like 2, 4, 7 inside of it. But we also want to view if it's actually doing the correct thing by the calculations, right? So if I run this program, I would get something like 13 in my terminal, showing that okay, the sum of the numbers 2, 4, and 7 is going to give you something like 13. But now let's say we don't want the user to come inside of the program. We want the user to use the terminal to specify their 2, 4, and 7 so we can calculate for the user, right? So how do we do that instead? So that's where our sys module will come in to help us. So how does this help us? Let's say, for example, now I'll just remove this print. Okay, I'll just remove this print line here, and then so what we're looking for in the terminal is something like this. We're looking for Python 3 of argv program.py, which is the program that we're currently in, and then we're looking for numbers which are going to be the arguments. In the terminal you don't need to specify commas. You can just say 2, 4, 7, right? This is how we are trying to receive these inputs, and then with these inputs we're trying to pass them here into the function and then return the sum of those numbers specified by the user, such that it's a tailored response to the user. Does that make sense? Let me fix the spelling of my Python here. Yes, yeah. So how do we get to do this using sys? As I said before, we are going to be using something called sys.argv. So what we can do with sys.argv is we can get our first argument. We can say it's sys.argv, and then we're going to say at the index of 1. Why at the index of 1? Because the sys module is looking at the program name as the 0th index, which is the first index, and then it's looking at this as the second index, which is the first index. It's looking this as the second argument, of which is sorry, so of which is at the first index, and then this one would be at the second and at the third. So we are still indexing the very same way you would index into your list and all those other things, except for the fact that at the first index is the program name that we are trying to run. Does that make sense? So we can go now and get our second variable as well from the terminal. We would say something like sys.argv and run it at 2, and then we can get the third as well, and then we can say it's sys.argv, and then we can get it at the index of 3, right? So now we have the first, the second, and the third. We can call our function and of course print the result at the same time. So we're gonna call get sum and then pass our first and then pass our second and pass our third as well, right? So we have that. So if we come now and run our program, you will see something very nice. It's saying that sys.argv1, and it's saying it's an index error, meaning the index is out of range. So as I specified before, to avoid this, you're gonna run your program like this now. So the user would have to now pass in the arguments from the terminal instead of using the nice run button over here. Yeah, so now what we can do to run the program, we're gonna use the very same syntax over here. For example, I can even copy it and try to pass it here. So what we have now is we have Python 3, which is the Python version that I'm using in my machine, and then we can specify the program that we're trying to run here, and then we can specify now our arguments separated by spaces, which is 2, 4, and 7, and then we can try to get the sum of that as well. So now if I run this, I still get something that is an error, and this is something that is introduced by the sys module. So the sys module, when it's collecting arguments, it normally collects the arguments as strings. For example, now if I come back and I print our first and I print the type of our first, I would get something like this. If I rerun the program, I would get something like this. It says is a string. So our sys module wants us to manually convert our inputs into the data types that we are willing to collect from the terminal. So in this case, for the sum, we know we need to get integers. So when we define our variables, we can specify that this should be an integer by typecasting like this. And if I continue again, if I continue again, we can get something like this, and then we have them as integers now. So I'm crossing my fingers now. If I run it like this, it's gonna give us something, and it does actually give us something, which is 13, which is the sum of the numbers that we passed here, which is 2 and 4 and 7, and we can calculate that as well. 7 plus 4 of course is 11. 11 plus 2 would be 13, which is what we are getting from our program, right? So this is just a lot of manualizations and all those other things. So I want you to take these notes in terms of using the sys module. So when you're using the sys module, normally what we see is if the user enters something wrong, we get something like this. We get something like so we get a type error, and we want to kind of improve how this can be handled so that the user can get a less cryptic error message when they run our program in a wrong way. For example, now I can forget to like specify the fourth argument. It would say list index out of range. You are still getting the same thing. So now to kind of fix this, we can actually try it another way to like print manually and all those other things. But since this video is about argparse, we are not going to go into trying to debug errors that can come from the sys module. We're just gonna go to argparse, which is going to kind of help us get the arguments in the way that we want them, and also help us avoid printing these types of cryptic error messages in our programs. So to do this, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into my argparse module and start using the argparse module instead. So to use the argparse module, you can just say import argparse, and as I said before, argparse is a built-in Python module, so you don't have to pip install it or do anything. It's already it comes with argparse itself, right? So now what argparse is a class of classes that contains classes that you can affect with different other methods. So it's just a lot of things to like take as it is. So practically what you're going to be doing, you're going to be creating an object of those classes, but you're going to specify the exact class that you want to get into. So practically with our program, and if I go back here, we want to get 3 arguments and print the sum of those arguments to the user as they enter it from the terminal. So I'm just going to take that amazing program I built on the other side and take it back into this side as well, right? So now we want to collect the arguments that we can use in our program as well. So how do we collect these arguments? In argparse, it's very simple. You just specify your parser, which is what's going to collect the arguments for you, and then your parser can be equals to argparse. And then, as I said, argparse is a class of classes. So as you can see, it's in color blue compared to functions like this. So when you say argparse, it shows that you are referring to a class, and you can say argparse.argument parser, which is another class. As you can see, it's not yellow, it's still blue, showing that it's another class. So we're specifying that with our parser, we want to use the argument parser class inside of the argparse class. I hope that makes sense, and we can do it like this, specifying it with the brackets as well at the end. So now we have an object of this class argument parser, and then the object that we have here, we can use it to get arguments. Does that make sense? So we can use this parser object to get arguments from the terminal as they are specified, right? So what can we do? Normally when you have an object of class, you can affect it with a method of that class, right? So for example, in this parser, you can say something like parser dot, and then what we are looking to do, and as it is suggested at the top here, we are looking to add an argument to the parser object that we are currently holding. So we're going to say parser.add argument, and then now we know our first argument is supposed to be something like first. We could just type first, but to denote to this argparse function that we want to get an argument and its name is going to be first, we have to put it inside of a string to say our first argument, the first argument that we're collecting, we're just going to call it first in this case, of course, right? So this would be our argument first, and then that would go from left to right in our terminal. So the first argument that we specified and we call first would be the leftmost argument, and then the last argument we are going to add with the parser will be the rightmost argument as well. So now we can say as well parser dot add argument as well. Again, we can say we want to specify in a string, of course, the second argument, and then we can go again and say parser.add argument as well. We can do it for the third argument as well, of which I don't know why VS is doing this to me, but yeah, we can fix it like that. So now we have an object that has been manipulated in a way that it now has the first, the second, and the third argument that it will collect from the terminal, right? So what can we do with it, with this object, that will be meaningful for us to use for our actual program, right? So what we can do with it, we can specify an actual separate variable. I'll just call it instead of argv, I will just call it args, sorry. So we are going to say args, which is the total arguments. Let me just say arguments instead, just so I can have a better naming convention here. So we'll just say arguments is going to be equal to parser dot. So now we have collected all the arguments that we were willing to get, but now we want to take these arguments and pass them to an actual variable. And as you can see as well, again, nominated at the top is pass args, which says we are going to pass the arguments to an actual variable now. So if we pass args, we're gonna get it like that. And if you notice, when we pass our arguments, it returns a namespace object, meaning now we are going to get something that we can index into with the actual names of the variables that we're trying to access. The actual names would be us referring to first, second, and third. I hope that makes sense. So now let's say, for example, we want to print what the user would have at the first index, right? So if we want to print that, how argparse helps us is we can say now arguments, which is the variable that we created here that holds the namespace objects of all our arguments. We can say arguments dot, and as we specified here at our first argument, we can say first. So now what's the difference? What's the first notable difference between argparse and using sys.argv is that in sys.argv you'd have to use instead indexes, meaning you'd have to have the exact knowledge of the position of the argument that you're trying to collect. But in argparse you would have instead use the name of the argument that you're going to collect currently. So how does this help you? You don't have to use cryptic indexes, and you have to use specific names themselves as you specified yourself in the add argument parameters, right? So now if we print arguments.first, and then I will still run it the very same way I was running it on the other side. So I would say Python argv program.py, which is now going to be different, of course. So now we have argparse.py, of which this can give us a problem, and I don't know if anyone can note what problem this would be, but I'll just run it instead. And then if I run it, it says can't open file argparse.py. It says no such file or directory. What would be the problem in this? So let's go back again and see. We're importing argparse, which is a module, and as I came to this file, I said if I come to my argparse module, I wanna do something inside of it. So this is a module, and this is the module we're using. So practically what we're getting, and what Python did not manage to specify for us correctly, is that, okay, the other thing I did is I did not correctly name this, so I'll just go down and rename it instead. Let me just rename the file. So I'll just go down and rename this first and say argparse, and then this is still going to give a problem. Yeah, this is the problem itself. So the reason why it's giving us this many lines in the program is because, let me try to see what Python says. It says attribute error. So what you are trying to do with this is you are trying to name your file name the same way and a Python module is named, of which can cause problems like we see here. So it's going to cause a problem. So instead we're going to say since this is just a program for YouTube, I will just say YT argparse, something like that. So yeah, we just converted to something like that, and I think now our program, in terms of how we modularized and did every other thing, should not have any problem. So if I run it now, what do I get? Can't open file argparse.py. Of course now I changed it to yt underscore argparse.py, and if I run it now, we get something like 2. Why are we getting 2? Because we were printing what's at the first argument, and what's at the first argument is this. So with argparse as well, you don't need to avoid the first argument and go to the second index. Since you are specifying exactly what you named your variable at the first index, you're going to access it the very same way. I hope that makes sense. So now we can get that our first argument is 2, right? And that's how you would access your variables inside of the arguments variable. So now to actually get to use our arguments in a function, we can now call the function. For example, let's of course print the result as well. We're gonna say print get sum, and then what we're trying to do is let's predefine our variables here using the way we can actually access them. So we're going to say first is equals to arguments, and arguments dot first, of course that's how we want to name it, and we can say as well second is equals to arguments dot second, and then we can say as well third is equals to arguments dot third, right? So that's what we have, and then now we can call our function, and when we call our function we can say first, second, and third. Yeah, hope that also makes sense. So now if I rerun this, we have this again. So this is the error we got on the other side of argparse, where we had to convert what we were looking at into an integer. So we would come here and convert those to integers as well, but that's not how argparse would expect you to do it. So with argparse, what I like is that you can specify what you're expecting and it can convert it to what you're expecting it to be automatically. So you can say something like, for collecting arguments, you can say all of the arguments that I'm collecting, I want their type to be integers. So you're gonna go through each line and say type is int, and come back again and say type is int as well. So now if you specify the types of these things as int, it converts them into integers and you get to work with them as integers. So now if I come back here and run it like this, the program doesn't break anymore. So what did we get in terms of argparse? So in terms of argparse, what we got is we can use the arguments for their actual names when we want to access them. We can use the arguments themselves as what we are trying to collect them as they are. And then what we also learned from this is that argparse is actually a class of classes, so you would have to go into the class that you are trying to use, and then you can invoke that you are done collecting arguments, and you can invoke it into a new variable and store it there. So it stores it as a namespace, and to access namespace objects you have to use the syntax as I outlined here as well. So that's how you can use argparse. But argparse is not only just that, it's even more than using sys.argv would normally be. So if you look at this and look at the size of the program and come back here and look at the size of the program, you'd say it's something much more smaller. But what I like about it is that it's more specific as to what you're trying to do with your program, right? So what we can also do for the user here, let's say for example now the user comes back and enters the very same thing, the very same error we got on the sys.argv side, and enters 24 and does not forgets to enter the last variable. What we can do is we can hit enter, and then now instead of getting the same cryptic error message we were getting the other side, we get a much more explainable error message that says, instead, when you run our program, you can just specify the file name. Don't forget to specify the first, the second, and the third. So it's not saying don't forget to specify what's at index 1, what's at index 2, what's at index 3. It tells the user exactly what they need to specify. And as well, if the user does not understand this very well, they can type -- help. And mind you, I did not do any coding that can help us print something to the user. But if I do this with argparse, what it will do, it will say to the user, this is the usage of the function. These are your positional arguments. As I specified, positional, you go from left to right, going from top to bottom with what I presented here. And it says the first argument will be first, and the second would be second, and the third would be third. And then you have optional arguments, which is what I just used now, which is the help argument. So you can just specify help, and then this would bring you to exactly where we are now. So what can we do to clean up practically to make this much more better for the user to read? As you can see, for the help one, we have some message as well that says show this message and exit. So this tells the user exactly what the help function does. So what we can do as well, we can specify help tags inside of our inside of our arguments. When we are adding them, we can say first number, and then I will just, as a lazy programmer, I will just copy this and then come back and paste it, and of course I'll have to change this to second number, and I have 2 commas now. Nice, lazy. So I would just say that, and then instead I would just say that number as well, and then after third number we would get something that's gonna help the user to like exactly know what these arguments are doing. So now we can see that this is the first number, this is the second number, this is the third number. So it tells the user what to do at the first one, at the second one, and at the third one. But now the user, if they just come to our program and just type -h, they're trying to learn more about our program, so they don't know what the first number, the second number, and the third number is. So what we can do as well is, before this, we can add a description right here that can tell the user that what our program essentially does, right? So for the program that we currently have, we have a program that returns the sum of the number specified in the CLI, right? So now we can come to the argument parser class, and then we can specify the description, where we can say the description is that we are going to return sum of specified numbers, right? So that will be the sum of the numbers that we have collected from the terminal. And now if I go back to the terminal and I type Python 3 of argparse --help, I will just hit enter, and then before the user comes to learn about the positional arguments, they would first learn about what the program does. So the program, as you can read here, returns the sum of specified numbers, of which was tailored by us as well for the user to know how to use our program. So that's what argparse is, and it kind of handles a lot of things. It handles data types, the types that we are getting into it, and it also does some automated parsing for us. And then as well, in argparse you can get to specify your default values, such that if the user does not specify the values, you can use the default values to kind of show them a demo of the program itself. So you have made it to the end of the video, and I hope you learned as much as I enjoyed teaching you this. Thank you.